Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. Thanks for joining. To kick things off, we have Mark Cachet from the Conservative Energy Network.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to our friends on the West Coast. I'm Mark Cachet, and if you're signed up to participate in the CEN CREST Forum polling presentation, you're in the right place. What I want to do is just real briefly talk about who CEN is and our history of polling and why this is important, and then we'll turn it over to the rest of the program. CEN is a national network of 20 state-based conservative clean energy organizations. We launched in January of 2016 to support the work of those state teams and to amplify the work of conservatives on clean energy. Polling is something that has been extremely important to our organization. This is our third national survey. The first was performed in November of 2016 in partnership with CREST, and our most recent survey was released in February of this year. Research has been an important element of our work. It demonstrates the widespread electoral support for clean energy development, especially and including among conservatives. We believe that getting conservatives and Republicans on board with a clean energy agenda is critical to the future of the GOP and the party's efforts to perform better at the ballot booth with key demographics that we've struggled with recently, including women, younger voters, college educated, and others. We do believe that as conservatives, that the right way to grow the clean energy industry in the U.S. is through competition and opening up markets to allow for the deployment of new technologies. So we're excited to release the findings of our most recent survey. Again, thank you for joining us today. And now I want to turn things over to Heather Reams, the Managing Director for CREST Forum and my good friend.
Thanks, Mark, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. Just wanted to give you a little bit of information about CREST, and certainly CREST aligns itself with the Conservative Energy Network. Our nonprofit arm is CREST Forum. It's a 501c3 nonpartisan organization, and we work very closely with the Conservative Energy Network between the federal and the state work that we do, creating a fabric and a network for the GOP to engage on issues that are going to benefit clean energy, the environment, and progress those issues forward. So, having an, trying to help influence a national conversation about common sense clean energy is really what we do. So we're so pleased to be able to share this poll with you. It's a very meaty poll. It's got some implications politically and policymaking that I hope you find interesting, and we'll share with your networks. With that, I'll turn it over to Glenn.
Great, thank you. Welcome everybody, and I am going to be doing this presentation along with Ashley Rich Stevenson. So you're going to hear us kind of bouncing back and forth basically every data slide. But if we could go on first to the methodology, I'll talk about that for just a minute, and we'll get into the data. If we go to the next slide. Oh, by the way, if you're listening, you should understand that neither Ashley nor I have control of the thing, so you will be saying next each time we want, except right now, each time we want the the presenter who has control of the presentation to go to the next slide. And just really quickly, we did the survey November 8th through the 12th, and it was 800 people who voted in the election, 320 of the interviews, so 40% were conducted with cell phone respondents. The remainder were landlines. Go on to the next page, please. And next. So we had 2/3 of the voters saying that clean energy was important to their vote in the recent election, 68% overall, including 36% who said it was very important. If you look to the right side of this chart, you can see that Republicans were basically evenly divided in terms of how important the election is. So basically, if you combine base and soft Republicans, it's around 50-50 Importance goes up among independents to 66%, and of course with Democrats, as you would expect, clean energy, they report that clean energy was very important to their vote. Next.
And I'm happy to hop in here, Glenn, if it's helpful. This is Ashley Stevenson from WPA Intelligence. We looked at this exact question by a handful of different demographic groups to get a better understanding of how important energy was to those who voted in this last election cycle. So among white men, and you'll see as you look from left to right on this slide, we see an increase in the disparity of how important this was. White men, 56%, so still a majority, despite it being the smallest discrepancy between important and not important, said it was very important to their vote. White women, this grows, 69% say it was important versus 30 who said not important, so a 39-point spread among that group. Minority men, plus 52 points, so 76% said energy was important to their vote. And then minority women, we see the largest advantage there at 89%, a 79-point spread compared to just 10% who say it was not important. And I think as we go back to what Mark and Heather flagged at the outset, as we look at some of the political ramifications of 2018 and how this issue set is going to play a key role going into the 2020 election cycles, we looked at this figure among suburban women. That is a group that's gotten a lot of attention in the press, and both parties are actively working to either regain or gain additional footing with that group. And among suburban women, 72%, so nearly 3/4, and it's more than white women overall, said that this issue was important to their vote in 2018.
Okay, next slide. Then we also followed that up with how important is it to you that a candidate for political office share your opinion on clean energy issues. Number came in a little bit higher, but again, higher overall, 76%, including 37% who say it's very important. As people on this call may well know, intensity is very important in public opinion. And when you have either either end on intensity, in this case, very important and not at all important, is over 30%. That's a pretty significant number. So you can see, again, overall, there's a lot of intensity in terms of the percentage you say this is very important. On the right side of this chart, it is, again, broken down by party. And similar to what we saw in the previous question, you still have a majority of base Republicans who say it is important. It's 56%, and even though it's not it's the lowest, it's still 56-43 is fairly strong, and it goes up among the swing vote, the soft Republicans to 63, the independents to 75, and then soft Democrats 87. And one of the things that we saw about soft Republicans for a different organization, I did a post-election survey in 7 key Senate states. And basically, in the 4 states that Republicans won, they did well with soft Republicans. And in the 3 of the 7 states we chose, in the 3 that they lost, the Republican candidates lost, they did not do very well with soft Republicans. So again, that 63% number in terms of how important clean energy issues are is pretty relevant. Next slide.
And to build on what we just looked at as it relates to importance going back to the election cycle, among white men, we had a 2-to-1 advantage by way of where the candidate fell on clean energy. 68% it was important to white men versus just 32% say not important. White women, this number grows, or the advantage increases by fully 20 points. 78% say it was important where the candidate was versus 22% say not important. Minority men, even outpacing white women here at 81% total import. And then minority women, the highest group, demo group, just like we saw in the previous set of slides at 88%. And again, to go back and talk about suburban women, because we do believe that it's so important for both parties, knowing that there's going to be a lot of time and attention spent on these voters, 77% said that it was important to their vote in 2018.
Then on this slide, we've got 81% who say they would vote for a candidate who supports clean energy development like wind and solar. And if you look at the 4 part region map of the U.S. just below that 81% figure, you can see there's really no statistical difference by region. It's 79% in the South, 79% in the Midwest, 82% in the West, and 83% in the Northeast. So this is something that crosses regional lines and is important everywhere in the country. And if you look at the top right of this, you can see that 64% of Republicans say they would vote for a candidate who supports clean energy development, 74% of independents, and 97% of Democrats. Next.
And here's the point in the survey where we start to get into different energy options. We asked a handful of different ways to look at this, or values of import. Do you think that as a country, the U.S. should put more emphasis or less emphasis, or about the same as it does now, on producing domestic energy from each of the following sources? So we look at a number of different solutions here. You see with wind, we continue to have strong majority who say more emphasis at 64%. And what is great, by the way, about these next couple of slides, because these organizations have invested in this research a handful of times, we've got trend lines to build on. So we are able to clearly show whether there has been an improvement or perhaps a little bit more or less emphasis for a number of these different sources. So wind has stayed consistent, 64% say more emphasis compared to February of 2018, it was at 66%. Solar power, same story, we were at 75% of likely voters who said more emphasis in February of 2018. Today we're at 74%, so about the same. And hydropower, we've seen a very small change where we were at 59% who said more emphasis in February, down to 54% now. But certainly to flag there, we are still at majority levels. Next slide.
Then we've got the ones that don't score quite as well, the different types of energy. Coal, as you can see, is 16%, 16% more emphasis, and a majority, 54%, want less emphasis. Natural gas is at 42 more emphasis, 17 less emphasis, and nuclear power remains relatively polarizing, 27% more emphasis, 33% less emphasis. And quick note on coal, obviously it's important in certain parts of the country because of coal mining. But again, overall, you do have a majority who would prefer the country place less emphasis. Next slide.
And this is where we start to dig a little bit deeper to allow us the ability to show you how Republicans specifically feel about all of these energy sources. You see when it comes to coal, we are evenly split on more emphasis versus less emphasis. Natural gas, a majority of Republicans, and there has been an uptick here from even since February, 52% say there should be more emphasis on wind. We're at 45% of plurality say more emphasis. It's about a 20-point advantage among those who say less emphasis. Solar power, we're above the majority threshold. Nearly 6 out of 10 Republicans would like more emphasis on solar. This is consistent with where we were in February. Nuclear, we see these numbers drop a little bit. We're below majority, almost at a 1-to-1 on more emphasis at 33 versus less emphasis at 20. And hydropower, we've seen a bit of a dip since February. We have 47%, so just about half of Republicans would like more emphasis on hydropower versus just 7% who say less. And thinking here again about suburban women, I do believe it's important for our conversation. 75% of suburban women would like more emphasis on solar. That's the highest source of energy that suburban women would support, followed by wind, very closely at 69%.
Now looking at independence, the same 6 questions, more emphasis and less emphasis. You can see coal is not as negatively perceived as it was back in February, but again, 59% still say less emphasis. So it's not like coal's image has bounced back with the American independent voter. Natural gas did bounce back, and it's now positive by the strongest level of the 3 times that we've asked this, at 43% wanting more emphasis and 16% less. Wind, is very consistent data. In fact, all 3 surveys found that it's 65% among independents for more emphasis. Less emphasis is only 17%, relatively consistent with the other two data points. And then solar power too. We've gone, 2 years ago it was 71%. No statistical change now, 70% more emphasis. Less emphasis, 16, then 10 in February, and 12 now. Not a wide range, a very narrow range of less emphasis opinion. Nuclear power among independents remains a slight negative. It started out a slight positive, but it is polarizing. 30% say more emphasis, 36% less emphasis, and then hydropower does pretty well with independents. Comes in third out of the 6 different energy options at 55% more emphasis, 8% less emphasis.
And this next slide is where we start to look at how voters feel about the role of government when it comes to the development of clean energy. So the question is, and would you say you support or oppose the government taking action to accelerate the development and use of clean energy in the United States? We see half of voters who strongly support this, 54%, going back to Glenn's comment about intensity. So keeping that in mind, we have over half of all likely voters would really strongly support this. The total support number is 81%. So this is an extremely important takeaway, especially for those of you who may participate, whether it's in the federal or the state legislative, regulatory, or policy-making space. There is very broad support for government action here to accelerate the development and use of clean energy. And if we could actually go back, I'm sorry, we skipped ahead. I did want to just flag where we were by partisan breaks. Base GOP, 63% who would support government taking action to accelerate the use of clean energy. That's truly significant. It's a 32-point advantage versus those who oppose it. Certainly as we move into soft or lean Republicans, those numbers get better at 71% who support it. 76% of independents are supportive of some sort of government action on this front. 95% of soft and lean Democrats, 95% of base Democrats. So it's really important to take note here that globally, as we look at this bipartisan breaks, Republicans are at majority threshold, certainly not at that 95% we're seeing with soft and base Democrats, or even 76% with independents, but it's wholly 63% of those very conservative Republicans who are in that place on the issue that they are comfortable with the government taking action. Again, amongst suburban women, bit of a broken record, 85%. So they fall above independents overall and close to that soft and lean Democrat space. Suburban women are comfortable and would like to see some sort of regulatory or legislative action.
Okay, moving on, we asked how they would prefer to increase clean energy production and gave 2 options. One was approaches that allow markets and businesses to provide more clean energy in production. That comes in at 63%. Then government mandates and quotas are half that at 31%. So again, you can safely say by 2 to 1, voters would prefer the markets and business to provide more clean energy in production rather than the government taking charge.
And here's where we do see some differences by party breaks. Republicans, it should be no surprise, 84% of base Republicans are more supportive of an approach that allows markets and business to provide more clean energy production. The 76-point spread versus those who prefer government mandates and quotas. Soft and lean Republicans, these numbers are still very strong, 82% prefer markets and businesses. Independents, 66% were still not majority threshold, and 57% of soft and lean Democrats are preferential towards the marketplace and businesses. The only flip we see here is where base Democrats, by almost a 2 to 1 advantage, do prefer government mandates and quotas. Amongst suburban women, we have a majority as well, 61%, who would prefer markets and businesses being those providing clean energy production versus the flip side where we have more government mandates and quota.
Okay, we then tested some attitudes towards different policy ideas. On this page, we tested 5. We tested another 4, so we had a total of 9. This is ranked, and I talked a little bit earlier about the importance of intensity. These are ranked by the percent who say they strongly favor it. And the top 2 came in basically the same, 59% strongly favor and a high 80s total favor. And as you can see, the 2 options that score best are allow more electric utility competition, which would give people the choice of what companies they buy their power from, as well as community renewable projects like solar that enable consumers to share the benefits and save money on their bills. The others on this page, I'm not going to read each one of them because you have a minute to look at them, all score very well. And when I also, I say 30 is kind of the low threshold for strong favor or strong oppose, and obviously none of these ideas are that strongly opposed, but I also use a baseball analogy, which I know Mark especially enjoys because we've spent many years talking about baseball together, and that is when you look at the intensity, anything that's in the 30s, consider a single. If it's in the low 30s, it's a soft single. Mid to upper 30s, it's a hard single. If it's in the 40s, it's an extra base hit. My rule of thumb is anything in the low 40s is a bloop double, mid 40s is a well hit double, and then 48, 49 would be a triple. And you can see we have the data access for consumer message, policy ID, I should say, coming in at a triple. Then anything in the 50s, that's a home run. And so we have 4 homers out of these 9 policy ideas, and that's a really good ratio. So, sometimes you test this stuff, and you're lucky to have a bunch of stuff in the mid 30s and maybe something in the 40s. And here we've got, as I said, 4 homers.
And to build upon Glenn's point, something that we've seen particularly in politics in the last year or two is that we struggled oftentimes to find messages that work really well, especially as we're looking for policy solutions for issues that we're working on. And even though this slide that we're looking at now has these numbers on the the intensity measures below a majority overall, we still have figures that total favor are at that 7 and 10 or above. So tax credits for advancing clean energy, overall, 82% favor this, 48%, so just about half, favor this strongly. That's followed by increasing government spending to modernize America's electricity grid, 77% total favor, 47% strongly favor. Creating a renewable portfolio standard mandating the specified percentage of the electricity utility companies sell come from clean energy sources, 75% still total favor, 44% strongly. And the last in this part of the study is cutting regulations and red tape that slow the development of clean energy resources, 73%, 41% favor this strongly. And something to flag here as well, if you have an interest in looking at any of these, perhaps by party break or even region, that's something we would be able to do, where these numbers would certainly adjust versus just the top line overall.
Moving on to the vote impact question. This wording was suggested by Ashley, and it's, as you can see, it's very clear in terms of what respondents think. 81% said they would vote for elected officials or candidates who support clean energy development like solar and wind, and 13% only would vote against. And again, good intensity, 38% saying they definitely would vote for. And on the right side, when you look at it by party, yes, Democrats most likely to say vote for, but you have a majority of base Republicans at 55% say vote for. You have 76% of soft Republicans and 74% of independents. So basically 3/4 of the all-important swing voters for Republican and conservative candidates say they're more likely to vote for a candidate or that they would vote for a candidate who supports clean energy development.
And this is the part in the survey where we start to get a little bit more specific in terms of different solutions on a host of other fronts. So this is relating to net metering. And we set these questions up in what we call a some people say, other people say, where we attempt to lay out either our argument very clearly along with taking a look at what perhaps the opposition is saying, and giving those who are participating in this survey a chance to very cleanly pick one side or the other. So relating to net metering, the question is, some people say net metering is fair because it encourages the development of solar resources and other customers to benefit from the extra solar energy that goes onto the electricity grid. You see that by a 2-to-1 advantage, the respondents in this survey side with that. Flip side was other people say net metering is unfair because solar customers use the electricity grid too and need to pay a fair rate for their use. They say that otherwise, solar customers' use of electricity grid becomes subsidized by non-solar customers. So we certainly see a significant 2-to-1 advantage here. This is something in the political world we're always happy to realize in survey work that's very clear supporting that one side of the issue.
And then what we see on the next page is that there's really not a significant party difference in terms of attitudes towards net metering. A majority of all partisan groups think that it is fair. And if you combine the base and soft Republicans, you're at 56% who say it's fair. And if you combine Democrats, say soft and base, you're at 68% who say it's fair. And, you know, there's just not that many issues where you only have a 12-point difference between the two parties. So the net metering, it's not just an overall 2-to-1, it's also something that crosses party lines.
And the next question, set up similar to this front, is asking voters how they feel about perhaps a new system for purchasing their electricity. So now I would like to read you two options about purchasing electricity, and please tell me which one you prefer. 83% would like a new system that allows people to have a choice, being the key word, as to where they purchase electricity and what kind of electricity, such as clean energy options. The other was the current system in which nearly everyone purchases their electricity from one utility. So we see a really significant 83% who are open to the idea that not only allows for consumer choice, but also brings in the option for clean energy to perhaps be the source of energy or utility they use in their own home or office space.
And then again, looking at it by party, it is very strong across party lines. Look, when you're winning issue 83-15 or a message fight 83-15, obviously it's going to score well with everyone. If you combine Republicans, you're at 76%. If you combine Democrats, you're at 86%. So really, again, not a huge partisan gap in how people react to it. And of course, independents are at 84%.
And finally, our last question that's set up in this method is, now I would like to read you two options about purchasing electricity and tell me which one comes closest to your own opinion. America can create a new electricity system that benefits the environment, accelerates the availability of new technology, and creates more choice by opening up markets to competition, giving consumers more choices instead of just their monopoly utility. That's 78% who select that option versus 20% who decide that they're preferential towards the current electricity monopoly system works fine as is, and change will only end up creating confusion, reducing reliability, and resulting in higher costs for consumers.
And then again, by party, it's very similar, which is Democrats a little bit stronger at 83%, but Republicans are at 70% when you combine them. So again, not a big gap. And I think what this battery of, well, what I like to call combat message development questions, where one side is given and then the counter side is also given, and keep in mind the two sides are rotated, so they're respondents are not hearing the same side first each time or last. Half of them are hearing one first and the other one last. Is that the survey respondents, voters respond very strongly to messages that talk about more competition and more choice, more basically market-driven options on clean energy. So it's not just clean energy; it is how that it gets delivered and consumers having choices. I think that shows up is very powerful in that sequence.
And coming up now on almost the end of today's presentation, this is where we test a host of different messages relating to, of course, clean energy. And like we did previously, we rank these by intensity. So I'm going to read you a few statements about why some people want to accelerate the growth of clean energy by speeding up the development of sources of renewables like wind and solar power. After each one, please tell us whether you agree or disagree with this statement. So as you see on this chart, we have 3 that cross that intensity measure threshold of 50% or above. And overall, all of these messages are at 72% or more in terms of voters who in total agree with this. So the strongest that we found in this research is clean energy companies should be allowed access to the same financing options that help traditional energy companies attract investment in new technologies. This would include giving investors a tax benefit for using private funds instead of taxpayer funds to support clean energy innovations. So what's interesting and a unique takeaway here is we've got perhaps either a legislative, policy, or regulatory solution that ultimately allows clean energy companies to get the same kind of financing that helps the traditional energy companies. I don't want to say even the playing field, but bringing more competition into the space or allowing them the opportunity to succeed or fill the same way that those who fall into the more traditional bucket have. Second to that, 56% strongly agree with the statement that we should accelerate the growth of clean energy so that our state can become a national leader in competition for economic development and good paying jobs. This was a really great message to see test so high, be second overall. I know we were all really excited about it because it is state-based in nature. And this is just an opportunity for those of you working in state politics or state policy for this to be an opening part of the discussion with those that you're engaging with in this conversation. And frankly, to be able to point to dozens, if not hundreds of examples across the country where states who have adopted clean energy technologies have been able to ultimately grow their economy and grow job opportunities at just a remarkable level. And then third, and it's the last one I'm going to touch on, it's the only one above that 50% plus strongly agree threshold we really look for in terms of intensity. 53% strongly agree, 86% overall, that we should accelerate the growth of clean energy so that we can decentralize our nation's electricity sources, protecting them from prolonged outages due to extreme weather or security threats. And this is a place where I would go back to some of the comments we made earlier about demographic groups that certainly conservatives are looking to grow among. In particular, this is a message that touches suburban women and mothers. And we've talked for a long time over the years, knowing that moms are very motivated by anything related to national security or threat. So this is a great place for not only female candidates, but female voters to find this as a message that's attractive to their potential or current constituencies.
And then wrapping up with the last data slide, we asked one more combat message development question, and that is, really it's incentives versus punishment. And obviously conservatives prefer incentives, liberals prefer punishment in terms of increasing prices, whether it's fines or taxes or anything. And people come down obviously quite decidedly preferring we need a climate policy that rewards those who cut pollution and use more clean energy, 77%, while 17% prefer a climate policy that increases prices for using forms of energy that pollute, including gasoline. So one of the things, hopefully, that you take away from the survey is that, well, two big takeaways, I think. One is that Republicans and independents, they might not be as strongly pro-clean energy as Democrats are, but they still are pro-clean energy. That's where voters are, and we're finding that increasingly so. And then the second is there are ways to talk about these issues in a way that appeals to the conservative side, the conservative point of view, which is relying on free markets, relying on rewards for those who cut pollution, for example, in this question. So, two very clear, I think, findings mega findings from this survey. And with that, I would like to turn it back over to whoever I'm supposed to turn it back over to, but I'm not sure who that is.
Thanks, Glenn. Hi, this is Larissa with Crest. If anyone has questions, there's more information on this last slide. You can find the polling information on the CEN website as well as the Crest Forum website if you want more of the numbers. The memo summarizing some of the survey findings is also available there. If you want additional information, you can contact myself, Larissa Fair, at lfair@citizens4.com if you want a copy of the slides or any additional information. And also on the slide, Glenn and Ashley's contact information is included if you have specific questions on the data that was presented. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll have a recording available. And again, you can contact Larissa at lfair@citizens4.com for any additional information on the survey. And thank you again to all who joined.